My new thing is I'm learning how to play. And that's really interesting for me because I've never really learned how to play before.
Play.
I know how to work. I've been a worker since I was 12 years old. There's a special kind of shame for queer people that's beyond the regular American shame that you get baked into with just by growing up in our culture. You know, so much of addiction treatment was about taking the individual out of their environment, reconfiguring them, and then putting them back into the environment, right? That's what that's what happens when they come to residential.
Right.
They come to us for 30 days. They do this huge unpacking. They get stabilized, and we try to set them on a new course, but we pretty much put them back in the system, this is why we do long-term things like sober houses and that sort of stuff, because we're changing the system that's sort of happening.
You know, there might be some confusion about dissociation. A lot of people might not know whether they have dissociated or whether maybe they haven't realized that they've been doing it their whole life, orbiting your body instead of being in it. It's a way to disconnect from reality. It might be a way for the body to defend itself, to self-soothe in the face of danger, because you can't run to safety. But with a lot of people in addiction, they learn to run to safety and chemicals to escape this way. So I've been fascinated by comparing dissociation in terms of the psychological phenomenon with the way we run to safety to try to escape the fear of facing our lives, the lives ahead of us, the lives that we have to build and construct and put work into, and maybe we're too afraid to live that path. Honestly, maybe we don't believe that we can live that path. Dissociating can also be a way to not show your cards. If you grew up in an environment that was dangerous for you to just be yourself, and in this way you appear loyal at all times to your captor who's put you in their emotional cage. The truth about emotional terrorists is that the only people who know who they truly are the people closest to them, and they will keep you hopeless and paralyzed so that you never give yourself permission to find your own strength, your own point of view, because your own point of view probably would tell you to escape. And sometimes this emotional terrorist will force you to process all of their emotions for them. And I'm just talking about a really destructive person. I'm talking about someone that has a lot of self-destructive energy and they want to pull you into their storm. And so you start to get confused about who's feeling what. Is this my authentic emotion, or am I just feeling what they would feel? And you lose your sense of self if you spend a lot of your childhood dissociating. And you don't want to show your cards to a dangerous caregiver or a captor. If you were raised by an emotional terrorist and kept in an emotional cage, then you know what it's like to be an emotional slave. And a lot of the time, this kind of abuse, it's like strangling your authentic emotion out of your nervous system. It's so hard for people that have been through this kind of abuse to express their healthy anger. If you live inside that other person's head, and you hear all their unfiltered thoughts, you are manipulated into rescuing this kind of person from their vicious inner critic. And no one can really do the inner critic shrinking work except you. So you can't do it for other people. And the more they try to be rescued by you to combat their inner critic, the less effective it's going to be and the more drained you will feel, because you don't have the energy to process more than one person's emotions. And to have to do it for someone else who's unstable, who can't self-regulate, is impossible. So you're kind of being asked to do the impossible and never complain and never leave. They find ways to make you feel dependent on them financially, emotionally, and other ways, living situations. They will find a way to oppress your voice. You will be unable to find your voice in this cage until they learn how to escape. And then they can just be. And after they've built a more secure foundation for their life out on their own, away from the control of this kind of emotional terrorist, And then they can sink into the somatic sensations of the body and find an entirely new revolutionary way of being themselves, of feeling pure joy unapologetically, and letting themselves enjoy the opportunity to live this life. Sometimes people come to discover that they are living in a constant state of fear and bracing for the worst and hurrying and rushing through their daily tasks in an emotional flashback. They're still acting like they're in that emotional cage, even though they've long since escaped. And so, talking about dissociation today with Jorja Jamison, my former professor at Hazel and Betty Ford Graduate School of Addiction Studies, was a really constructive conversation. It's fascinating to peek into someone's world who has escaped this kind of torture and has gone on to become one of the best educators in the field. I am Justin, the addiction guy, and I challenge you to set yourself free.
Yeah, what I was telling you is once you've healed, and for me, trauma was about shame. Once you've healed, for me, once I healed from shame, life becomes fun. You get to do things that you are curious about. So I've gone from being very scared of people to being super curious and drawn towards them. I love meeting people and talking to them and hearing their stories. Whereas before it was just a way of, please don't see me, please don't see me, please don't see me. Mm-hmm. That was all my interactions. And my new thing is I'm learning how to play. And that's really interesting for me because I've never really learned how to play before. I know how to work. I've been a worker since I was 12 years old. And I know how to work and achieve and like all of that stuff. But how to do things that just bring you joy. And when you're in your trauma, there is no joy. But once you've healed, you have access to the joy. And now you can go out and play. And so that's kind of the area I'm in my life. My new thing right now is I'm taking Fridays off, which, trust me, is actually a really hard thing for me to do. I wouldn't say I'm a workaholic. I work a lot, but my identity is expressed in my work. So I am who I am at work. And my wife challenged me to take Fridays off this summer. And it stuck in the back of my head for a little while because I had an idea for my next book. And I was telling her about I was getting excited. Fridays were always my project day. This is how I wrote Wounded Healing. It was on Fridays. I always committed to Fridays for writing. And I have an idea for my next book, and I'm telling her about it. I'm getting excited and all this other stuff. And she was like, "You need to take some time off." And I didn't hear it at the time, but it stayed in the back of my head. And I was at school one evening because we teach in the evenings, and it was during break. This past semester, so a couple of months ago, and all of a sudden I was like, what would it be like to just take Fridays off? Like just to have all 3-day weekends. And it was like, I felt my body kind of go like, and when you heal from trauma, you have access to that. You can listen to those things.
Okay, so listening to your inner sense of self and what you want.
And then I've learned to go towards those things, to be curious about those things. And so, yes, I feel energy towards writing this other book. Like I feel like this, I see it. I start writing it in my head, paragraphs come out kind of a thing. And so I know I'm going to be drawn to that. There were a couple of other projects that I could see could be done. And I know how to do them. But I wasn't feeling the energy towards them, the passion towards them. And as I was telling you before we started recording, I'm lucky to be at a place with enough power and privilege in my position that I can choose to do the things that I'm drawn towards. I'm done with the musts in my life. I'm full professor now. I've done everything you can do at the grad school. And now I get to just work on the things that really I want to. And so mentorship is a big thing for me. I have a lot of mentoring relationships with young counselors, helping them develop ideas and start presenting them to the public, or helping them find who they are, particularly when you're um, a brown or black person or BIPOC or queer or something like that, and trying to find your way in your identity as a counselor. How do you do that when you only feel like an imposter? How to normalize that process and help them through it. So I love what I do. I'm very lucky.
That's awesome. So you do mentoring. How many mentees do you have?
I think last year, because you have to record it on your annual review, I think I recorded probably like 8 or 9. Yeah, I mean, it brings me joy. So I remember one day I was sitting with a student and helping them in their journey and time of that. And I was revealing some of my journey because I had a rough journey coming through grad school. It took me 9 years to get through a master's and PhD program. That's like 3 years longer than it's supposed to take because I had some work I had to do.
In Illinois?
Yeah, when I was at the University of Illinois. And so I'm kind of sharing part of that. And I remember they were looking at me the exact same way I looked at my gurus. And all of a sudden I saw it. I saw this whole river of wisdom that had been passed down to my mentors, that had been passed down to me, and that I was now passing on. And the connection and the feeling of all of it just sort of moving through me and my body and my spirit. And like, it's now, I was just meeting with a mentee yesterday, and she's at a place where I'm starting to talk to her about, it's time for you to find ways to pass it on. And it was just like, it's magical. It's great.
Yeah, passing that wisdom on. Where were you in your life when you decided to write a memoir?
So recovery finally stuck for me in 2015. I started my recovery journey way back in 2004. Actually, back in 2002, because that was when I went back into therapy. And my therapist actually had to work on me for a year and a half to get me to go to a 12-step meeting, because I was introduced to it when I was 17. I went to treatment for bulimia, and they used Overeaters Anonymous. So it was the 12-step philosophy. And the second they got to the word God, I just knew, well, that's not me, because I mean, the one core thing I knew about my identity was I'm an atheist. There is no God. But I also grew up in the Bible Belt South, where I knew you do not talk about that. You say that to no one. You keep it secret. And so when they produced the solution that had God in it, I mean, it was just like kind of coming to me and saying, oh my God, I found the perfect person for you. They're delightful. His name is. It's like, I'm queer. Like, I'm a lesbian. Like, no point. There's just no point. Like, it's kind of like trying, just, okay. So it's just not for me. But she kept working on me because she knew that I was, had the 12-step spirit in me. But I went to my first 12-step meeting in January 2004. But recovery didn't stick until 11 years later. Once recovery stuck, and I finally started on sort of my healing journey. I call it a healing journey more than I call it recovery. When I had my healing journey, I was about 3.5 years in when the promises came true. I was fully living in the promises. And through my teaching, through the work that I do with clients that I see, because I'm a psychologist, so I see clients on the side of my professor job, I just collected little stories that I often told people, or that I often taught to students in terms of the work that we do and all the other stuff that we do. And I just started a note on my phone with the story ideas, kind of a thing, and sort of collecting them. And so then it was about 2019 when I was like, I think I have a book in me. And I've been at meetings, I've been in class, I've been in other places where you share something or something like that, and people are like, you should write that down, or you should write a book, kind of a thing. And, it was like, no. But it finally internalized about 2019. And then the pandemic happened. And then that year in 2020, I said, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to do this. And the idea came to me to weave my own personal story, so chapters of my own woundedness, with chapters of stories that I teach students and clients about healing, things that I've learned sort of along the way, and to go back and forth. Like, that's the concept, because we don't go from wounded to healing. We're actually wounded and healing all at the same time. And that's okay. Like, that's how it works. And so I interweave the two. There's sort of the story of my woundedness. And I'll get to a point and then I'll stop the story and then go back to sort of healing chapters, things that I've learned. And we sort of pick it up along the way. Because even though I didn't get sober until 2015, I had 11 years of learning things and internalizing things. And actually, so I've been a member of Overeaters Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Codependence Anonymous, Al-Anon. Like, I've done all the 12-step programs. And each one of them offered a different way to heal. And so even though I was still using, even though I was still active in my addiction, going to Codependence Anonymous for 7-8 years, I healed my codependency. Like, I was no longer codependent. I learned how to set boundaries. I learned what a healthy relationship was, and I got to start having those, even though I was still active in my use, so there's like this interwoven wounded and healing thing that we do. And I'm still wounded. Everyone, kind of still wounded. But I am at a place now where I live pretty much in the promises. Like, it's just sort of, and it's shocking, just shocking. If you knew me, really knew what my life was like and how I experienced the world back in 2008, 2005, to who I am now. It is, as the big book says in Appendix 2, when you have the spiritual experience, you experience a complete personality change, right? It's a total personality change. And with all the issues with God, and I pretty much had to pretzel twist my way through the 12 steps because of that, but I found my way. But through that,
I can relate.
Yeah. Through that, when I got it to work and when it worked and when the promises came true, I realized I have gone from a completely shame-based, fear-based, totally depressed person. That's how I experienced the world. To open, curious, loving, gentle, accepting. Like, that's now how I experience the world. So that's a complete personality change. Ergo, according to the big book, somewhere along the way I had a spiritual experience. I have no idea what it was or how it happened, but if that's what happened, okay, that's fine. I can believe that.
And I noticed in your book the weaving of different chapters. Like, one chapter is sort of a set of therapeutic tools, and you're one of the most educated addiction professionals in the world, probably. And it's really great to absorb some of your tools that you're probably giving to clients and that you've even used yourself. And then you read kind of a chapter about your life story, and it's really interesting to see. I don't know if I've read a memoir that is sort of a mixture of like a self-help book and a story that's really interesting, and you wonder how it's going to turn out because there's a lot of situational irony. I wasn't sure if you were going to make it for a while when you went on that cruise and stuff. So it really keeps you kind of on the edge of your seat whether or not you're going to actually find what you're describing is that life is good and fun and joyful and great, and you don't even know that when you're masked in your trauma, when you're stuck in your fear of people, fear-based personality,
Yeah, for me, my addiction was all about numbing. I used to numb because it was intolerable to feel the pain inside of me. I couldn't do it. We just had this conversation. Somebody brought in a reading actually from Brené Brown from her Gifts of Imperfection. And it was talking about sort of the particularly American proclivity towards numbing, the way that we numb with technology or TV or booze and cigarettes and sort of all the other stuff, the numbing, and how that's what blocks us from vulnerability and creativity and sort of all that stuff. And I was like, absolutely. Like, my use was all about numbing, but I honor that now because I needed that to survive. That was a survival strategy for me. I had decades of pain inside of me that it was intolerable to feel. And so numbing was necessary. And then when I got to a place in my life, and it apparently took me 11 years of 12-step recovery, where I was willing to do the work and was capable of doing the work. You go through, you have to feel the pain and work through the pain. But once you've done that, once you've done the trauma work, the healing work, the that sort of stuff, I no longer need to numb. And for me, the biggest gift of recovery, if I had to say the difference between me living in recovery and living in addiction, is I fully feel and embrace my feelings now. Whereas before it was all about numbing them. I couldn't feel. Feeling was dangerous. Feeling was inescapable. Couldn't do it. And now I start to feel a feeling come up in my body, and it's just open curiosity. Well, oh, hi there. What's that about? What's going on with that? What are you trying to tell me, right? And then let me respond to it, and then let the feeling go and let the next feeling come in. And that to me is the essence of the difference between my addiction and recovery.
And that's interesting because not feeling is something that some cultures teach, like even their kids. Like it's sort of a cultural thing, right?
Very culture based. Yeah, it's very culture based. And I'm an American kid, and I was an American kid in a very capitalist community, right? Kind of a thing. But yeah, for me, it is very tied to, I grew up in an American culture.
And feeling your dreams, your ambitions in life, like what was it like to finally give yourself permission to like be bold and open and about your story and write this book?
I don't even know how that happened. Like I'll read a chapter. I'm like, I can't believe I wrote that down. Like, did I really just expose that to the whole world?
It's so honest and like, yeah.
I wrote that book on my couch during the pandemic.
Oh.
On Fridays. Like I just sat with my computer and typed it out. And I would just start in a chapter, and it would be like, it was, what chapter do I feel drawn to write today? Kind of a thing. And there were times I would wake up in the morning and like paragraphs were just flowing out of me. Like writing the book was almost a spiritual experience. Like there was this urge, and this, like things just kept coming up, and it was like, write it down, like capture it, write it down. And again, if you knew me, because my use I kept hidden for so long, my addiction I kept hidden for so long, I never ever would have told anyone anything. To go to putting all of that down, all of that, and exposing it to the world, like it's just a complete 180.
What did that do to your shame about those things?
The difference was I healed my shame.
Okay.
Because as long as I was captured and entrapped by shame, because shame grows in the dark, shame is about keeping it secret. And part of my healing journey, part of feeling all the pain, was feeling the shame and turning the shame around and healing the shame. Once you've healed the shame, there's no need to keep it secret, right? I mean, I've done some despicable things. I've done some really odd, crazy things, right? And when I was living in shame, it was about keeping those secret. But now that I've healed from that, and I see that it can be a useful story for other people who are on their own journey, it's just like, how quickly can I communicate it to them?
It is healing.
Yeah.
It kind of transmutes it so that, and when you expose, it's like exposure therapy in a way, like you're exposing the stuff you used to be ashamed of, and then it sort of becomes something people love you for. You get the opposite reaction.
It's really shocking how being so vulnerable, because if you think of the root word of vulnerability is to be able to be wounded. That's where it comes from, the Latin. The vulnerable part means to be wounded. So able to be wounded. And what a message that is in a word. That being vulnerable means there's the possibility of wounds. But the truth of vulnerability is it's actually the doorway to all the things that we learn, the connection, the creativity, all of it. And once you've healed from shame, there's no desire to keep those things secret.
You carry it differently. You carry it maybe with a lighter, more welcoming energy. And you talked about like dissociating in your book a lot, which is kind of, you gave me a breakthrough because I realized I had been kind of, when I'm living in I call it a emotional flashback or like a trauma flashback when your body is hijacked by that fear-based personality and the way that I move through the world. It's sort of like I felt a lot of the time in a hurry to get to safety, but I was never quite there, and I was living somewhere just outside of my body, kind of hovering, but not quite feeling my body. So you don't have access to the joy that you could feel if you're in your body, or like getting into your body gives you that access to confidence and your sense of self and things like that. And I wanted to talk a little bit about dissociation. First of all, you're the professor here, so what is dissociation?
So dissociation is a psychological term where a person kind of steps out of being present in the reality of their lives. And you can dissociate in lots of ways. The classic way is when somebody has the feeling like they're kind of floating above the scene, looking down, watching it, right? That's the sort of like dissociation. Another way of dissociation is the sort of derealization, the sort of like feeling like it's not reality, like you're in a dream. Like there's just sort of a disconnect kind of a thing. But it's all about taking you out of the present moment. And for me, it was, again, survival. It was a way to numb. If I could dissociate, I didn't have to feel anything that was happening with me. I look now at dissociation as this beautiful, beautiful gift our bodies and minds gives us to protect us. So when I see somebody who has dissociation or going through periods where they're dissociating, I look at it as what a beautiful way your mind and body has found to keep you safe and to help you. If it's a goal of theirs to work towards not doing it, that's fine. But I usually use it more as a benchmark. If there's lots of dissociation going on, then something's happening that is overwhelming the person in terms of how they can cope and how they can kind of go through kind of what's happening. And then as they heal, they start dissociating less. And it becomes a benchmark of, yes, we're going in the right direction. Yes, things are happening that are going well. But I don't look at dissociation as a bad thing or a wrong thing.
But it's interesting hearing this like strengths-based look, this angle at dissociation. And I wonder about people like, the big book says something about like the alcoholic's like an actor always trying to run the show, like the control freak type archetype. And I wonder if that is a form of dissociating. If your mind isn't quite in your body, because to do that is to be powerless over other people and events. And when you're dissociating, maybe you're just trying to control everything.
It's kind of a separate kind of thing. The attempt to control things. It's from the same source. There's something that's intolerable inside the person to deal with or to feel or something like that. And so one is to dissociate. Well, let me just not feel it. The other is, let me try to fix the outside to be in a very particular way with the underlying belief that if I can make it go a certain way, then I'll be okay inside.
Is that where anorexia comes from too? Is sort of restricting
to
control your...
Yeah, I mean, that's one way to look at it. That is certainly one way to look at it. With anorexia, of course, you also have a lot of cognitive distortions around body image and that sort of stuff. But anorexia is a disease of control. What's really interesting is we have found the most effective form of treatment for anorexia is family therapy. It's not actually an individual intervention, it's a systems intervention. And
why do you think that is?
Because if you think about that, the person with anorexia is expressing the symptoms of a sick system. It's coming into the individual, but the problem is in the system. There's something with that's happening in the household that's not healthy or going right, and so the person with anorexia is the one that develops the symptoms, that expresses that and tells that, but the problem is actually in the system.
Wow, that's fascinating. And that would be really difficult family therapy to force anyone to look at themselves outside of the client themselves. Like a lot of family usually resists taking accountability or a look at themselves.
And again, when you have a sick family system, absolutely.
Right.
There's the part to this is where you get the identified patient. We're going to say this person who's expressing symptoms, the acting out behaviors, or the eating disorder, or the mental health symptoms, or the substance use disorders, like all this sort of stuff. We're gonna locate the source of the problem with the one individual, but it's really the whole system that is sick, that has the problem is just getting expressed in that one person.
How do you experience dissociation?
So for me, dissociation is I literally feel my brain go to the back of my head and check off. And my experience of me is like located just behind my head. So I am sort of removed from who I am, but it is, I feel no feelings completely. There is no feeling. And it always gets triggered. There's a strong feeling that's coming out. And I still have instances where I go into dissociation today when I'm having a trauma response. It does come up. Far few. I mean, like maybe a couple of times a year. Whereas it used to be 80% of my day was dissociation. I mean, that was just how I went through it. That was how I was able to be a worker and to achieve success.
Oh,
Dissociation was the path to do that. Because as long as I could dissociate, then I could be a good psychologist. I could be a good teacher. I could be good at all these things. Dissociation was necessary for that.
to get work done?
Yeah.
So to face fears, or
It wasn't shut off all mine.
is it like living in hiding in a form, or?
Very much.
Okay.
Yeah, very much. Sometimes they say becoming a therapist, becoming a psychologist, becoming a counselor. Sometimes it's a twisted, sick thing, a way to hide from your problems, because you get to focus on your client's problems.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's what your job is, to focus on your client's problems, and in a way that kind of shuts off access to your own problems.
Right. No counselor self-disclosure.
And no counselor
It's a
self-disclosure.
safe place, a safe position to be directing all the questions.
Exactly. If I can focus on you and we can heal you and focus on your problems, right? I will get some osmosis maybe from that. Like maybe some of your healing will come into me. So I'm healing you will somehow selfishly kind of help heal me, but I don't have to actually look at any of my stuff to do it. I get to just focus on sort of you and who you are.
So why do you think people dissociate?
For a lot of reasons. I mean, it for me, it tends to be a strong trauma response. That's why the dissociation disorders are located just in the chapter behind the trauma and stressor disorders in the DSM. They have their own chapter. You can just dissociate. You can't just have a dissociative disorder. But usually there's something that is overwhelming the individual's ability to experience and cope. And again, in my conceptualization of it, it is just an absolutely beautiful solution that our minds and our bodies came up with. Most people who dissociate learn how to do it as children. It's something that you learn when you're young, which makes a lot of sense, because when you're young, when you're a kid, you have no control. You can't leave the situation. You can't go move to another house. You can't go live in a different life, kind of a thing. You were stuck where you're at. And so I just think it's a wonderful way our psyches learn to get us through a situation. And then it becomes a way that we deal with lots of things, lots of emotions, or lots of things that we don't want to experience. And then we carry that trait into adulthood.
So it's kind of a reaction. It's a protective reaction to an environment.
For me, you talk about an aha moment in early recovery. The biggest aha moments that I have experienced with individuals comes when they realize how they've been doing things, how they've been living is not the only way to live. There are other possible ways to get through and experience life, something like that. And then they realize that they are capable of doing things differently. And you'll see it come over a person of like, I don't have to live that way. I don't have to stay in this horrible relationship. I don't have to be depressed all the time. Like I don't have to do all the, kind of a thing. And we're there to say, no, you don't. There's other choices you can make that can make you live differently. And we're here to help you do that.
It's sort of this like forced suffering. They think they're chained to, that's kind of a codependent thing too, right? Like thinking that you owe someone your life or your time or.
So if you think about it, even the high-powered executive, right, that feels locked in, they can't do anything else because they make so much money. What else are they going to do, right? And they have to provide for their family, or they have to pay for their parents' retirement, or they have to pay, that sort of stuff. They get locked in. I have to. I must have this job. This is the only way I can experience life. But I'm miserable. I hate my job. It's sucking my soul, right? And to introduce, what if there's another way to live?
Yeah.
What if there's another way to do things, right? And yeah, every choice will have consequences. Every choice has different things that you'll have to deal with. But you're not locked in to living the way you're living. No one is.
Yeah, that's fear of like disappointing people. People are gonna have negative thoughts about me, and Mel Robbins taught me that. It's sort of like, that's why I'm doing this podcast. I know people are gonna have negative, judgmental thoughts about me trying to broadcast something, but let them. They're going to, and so maybe the executive is really afraid of kind of those kind of thoughts or that kind of conflict, or yeah, people also with money, like people can get pretty crazy.
Well, yeah, and that's what traps, right? I can't. Because.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what if you could?
So you set people free from those kind of obligation mindsets.
And I have no idea what the outcome is going to be. I just know there's other ways to live. And you're miserable living the way you're living. What if we tried other ways of living? Let's figure that out. Let's explore.
Mm-hmm.
That's the fun part.
So you found new ways of living lately by kind of treating this trauma and getting kind of more present, so that you talked about laying down memories. I thought that was interesting. So when you're dissociating, you don't lay down memories?
I think there's a certain extent you do. I do remember some things, but I think I remember you had this conversation with Joe. A very common symptom of trauma is the inability to form memories.
Yeah.
I have that. I don't remember much of my childhood. I just have no memories. They're just not there. And I also know in my adult life, when I'm having a very intense experience, I know something has happened, but I have no memory of it. So when I finally came clean, because I pretended to be sober in 12-step recovery, even though I was still using those 11 years. I presented to all 12-step communities I was in that I was in active recovery, that I wasn't using. And I did everything you can do in 12-step recovery. I worked the steps. I did my 4th and 5th step inventory. I made amends. I did service work. I was trusted servant at meetings. I sponsored people. I did everything you can do in recovery except stop using. That was, and I don't know if I had some twisted idea in my head that if I just worked everything and did everything, the desire to use would leave me, right? That's not how it works. But when I finally came clean, as you know, I was seen almost as a guru in some of my meetings. And I finally came clean that I was very active in my use and that I was very much in despair. I know, it was just a bawling episode. It was, just tears and snot and pouring your heart out and like all of these things. And I know when it happens, when you're in a meeting and somebody comes in and they have that moment, you feel the whole room's energy go and like just sort of envelop this person in a place of love and care and concern. And like, I have had those moments a couple of times, right, where I've done that. I have no memory of them. I have no memory of them, but I know I did them because it was just so intense. My mind was offline. I couldn't record that in my memories.
Well, being able to cry like that and like let emotions out, almost like a child temper tantrum-y cry, like it's almost like you're letting out these repressed feelings, right, from a certain age or something. But I think that's a really important, if you're not able to cry like that, then I don't know if you're going to be able to get further in progress in your healing. It's a really important part of, I think, of the healing process.
The breakdown, the breakdown is, it's the doorway. It's when you finally, it's like the image for me isn't a temper tantrum of a child. It is somebody who's got a suit of armor and finally opens it up and just lets themselves pour out onto the ground, totally broken, totally like, all of that. Just they're just an absolute mess in front of everyone. I've had those moments and I do those things. But in that particular case, I don't have a memory of it. I have even really joyful events. When I finally got my doctorate and I got to walk across the stage and get hooded by my mentors, and it was such a joyous occasion because it took me so long. There was like all this stuff. I have no memory of it because the feelings were so intense. It didn't record. So I know I walked across the stage. I know I got hooded, but I have no lived memory of it.
Why did it take you so long to get to the graduation?
For my doctorate?
Yeah.
2 reasons. One was this is where I started my healing journey. So I started grad school in 2001. And it was very clear by my first clinical experience, my pre-prac class, that I needed some psychological help. And so I was able to step out of clinicals for a year and start therapy. And so that put me a year behind. So that was one problem. That sort of took me longer.
That would make me nervous, and it did when I started interning at Hazelden, because you're working with a bunch of people that really know. They can look you up and down, and they can like see your issues. And one of the first things you said to me at the bake sale for the Gender and Sexuality Alliance was, "You're gonna need to work on some perfectionism." Like I think you said something like that, and I realized, oh my God, I'm in a building full of therapists. Like I can't hide, and they're gonna figure out that I'm like really messed up.
So 2 things. One, the other thing that took me so long to graduate was perfectionism.
Okay.
Because I was trying to write the perfect dissertation, which involved a whole convoluted thing. So it took me 3 years longer to finish my dissertation. I also had a lot of shame. Writing was very painful for me at the time because I had this shame voice in my head. I would write a sentence and right behind me would be a character standing critiquing the sentence. Well, that's a stupid thing. Why'd you write that? Or like every sentence was that experience.
And you'd get lost in those thoughts.
And it paralyzes you. Mm-hmm. So all parts of the research, the coming up with the idea, doing the lit search, recruiting participants, collecting data, analyzing the data, loved it. Just give me more, loved that. Writing the results, very difficult because of that process. So perfectionism and shame. So what happens when you feel shame? Well, I'm going to produce the perfect product because if I produce the perfect product, nobody will see that I'm worthless, which is what shame is, feelings of worthlessness and feelings of aloneness.
You're running away from that fear of worthlessness.
So, all perfectionism, I think, is rooted in shame. Mm-hmm. I think fear is about not feeling safe, that there's some threat. That something is going to happen. And our basic survival is based on having people around us. We're social creatures. So we fear rejection, we fear abandonment, we fear judgment, like those sorts of things, because we need other people to survive, right? Nobody can survive on their own. And so we evolved as a species. I have a very biological evolution-based kind of understanding for a lot of psychology. We evolved as a species to need to connect to one another, to need the approval of one another. It's part of our survival. People who had strong feelings of needing connection, needing approval, survived because they were more grouped together, and you need other people to survive. So that got traded and passed down in terms of, so people, we have this innate need for these things. So we have these innate questions that kind of come in their head. Are they going to reject me? Are they going to approve of me? Are they going to sort of do all those things? I just sort of see it. There's my evolution, right? There's this sort of thing. And then the reality is most people do want to connect. Most people do want to see you. Most people, when they actually see you and the vulnerabilities, it is the source of connection, not a source of rejection, right? Kind of a thing. So that's just how I look at it.
Oh, that's fascinating. I love your scientific perspective. And that's one thing in your book, that the way that you kind of scientifically delineated how the 12 steps work and how and spiritual experience. And it was very like, I love where science and spirituality meet. So it's what I'm passionate about.
So do I. It's so fun. Yeah.
Maybe we'll get Jodie Foster to play you in the movie. So when you finally got over a lot of this stuff, or what the big challenge at the end of the big triumph, spoiler alert, is that you were able to attend your own wedding and have done a lot of work on yourself. You're able to remember that experience, even though it's a very intensely emotional experience, right? Unlike your graduation.
Yeah, I remember, and this is, I did write about this when I was engaged in preparing for my wedding. I was in the midst of the core of the healing work. I was working with a therapist, and we were doing some really deep dive on the shame and the stuff like that. I had found this wonderful woman, and we were getting married. And the months leading up to it, I was so scared. The only thing I wanted was to go through that day and be present. I just wanted to be present. It was so simple. And I was so afraid that it was going to be so intense, like my graduation was, or like other things in my life, that I was going to have that trauma response, and I wasn't going to lay down any memories of it. And, I shared it in therapy. We worked and we talked. And I mean, the truth is your body's going to do what it needs to do. Like, let's just trust your body that if it needs to take care of you in that way, it's going to take care of you in that way. And that's okay. But I had progressed enough in my healing. I was able to go through the whole day. I remember. And there was one moment where I kind of stole away, and I went upstairs and I got my phone and I just texted my therapist, like I've been present the whole day. And it was like that quiet little moment of like just sitting and feeling the success and the joy and the accomplishment of being present. Was massive.
It's awesome.
And really, I think my journey to healing, if you think about it, if we go back to our feelings, I feel my feelings, right? That sort of stuff. It just means I'm present. It's the journey of learning to be present.
Yeah.
And what is all meditation? What is all yoga? What all of it is, how can you just be present, be in the present moment?
Yeah, and the emotional challenge of a wedding and the way it's designed, it's a really vulnerable thing to do, to step in front of people. You really got to be kind of sure that you're emotionally safe with this partner, that you're going to you're going to put a ring on, and it's exposing yourself to possible judgments, or, and even especially like in the LGBTQ2 plus community, like, although I think it would be beautiful to have a wedding someday, there's going to be family members that are, they have thoughts and they're from a conservative way of viewing things. And so how was that for you, facing that potential judgment?
For me, I have no shame for being gay. And I have completely separated from anybody who has judgments. That's their judgments. That's their malfunction. I can let it be their malfunction. I know who I am. I know my queerness is awesome and beautiful and right. And if somebody else doesn't think that way, they're the one with the malfunction, not me. And because I don't have codependency anymore, I no longer have to convince them. I no longer have to be a certain way in front of them. I can just be me, and they can do whatever they need to do with it. With that is kind of where I'm at. I don't think we had any people attend the wedding who had that. It was a small wedding. It was 50 people. It was very particular in terms of who we invited. So we didn't run up against having conservative or people with different worldviews kind of come. But if they have, and when I encounter them now, that's, kind of how I, kind of experience it. But going back to when you said the voices, will they reject me? Will they, or what are they thinking? That kind of thing. I remember RuPaul. So RuPaul has this technique where you don't try to shut off that voice. You sort of note it. Oh, hi. Criticism, you're there again. Good to see you. Thank you for your input. I'm going to go a different way. And then you engage in the situation a different way. You engage in the situation with joy and curiosity or messiness or like whatever it is. And, it's a great technique. It's just beautifully done. When that criticism, that critical voice shows up. Oh, hi. Good to see you. Hope you're doing well. Thank you. Thank you very much for what you're telling me. I'm gonna do something different.
So you're not like ignoring or dismissing or trying to push down the inner critic. You're
accepting it.
Accepting.
Just full acceptance of it. But making a different choice.
Yeah. I loved RuPaul's. I'm in the middle of his master class. So I'm excited.
What's the master class about?
RuPaul teaches people on how to kind of just be your authentic self. Like it's kind of what you were talking about. Mm-hmm. It's really inspiring. He says and it's kind of guided towards like gay people because we have a specific kind of rejection sensitivity.
Mm-hmm. Special rejection sensitivity that gay people feel, literal rejection people feel that they've internalized. So the internalized shame that we have. There's a special kind of shame for queer people that's beyond the regular American shame that you get baked into with just by growing up in our culture. A capitalist society that tries to teach you that who you are is not good enough. You must buy this product in order to be good. It's the purpose of every single advertisement is to communicate a message to you. You are not good enough how you are. You need this. Mm-hmm. And that's what drives capitalism, right? Mm-hmm. So we have the baked in American capitalism shame that we all have. And then you've got the queerness shame on top of that. And then if you also have a substance use disorder and you've been hiding stuff or living a double life or all this, you got that shame kind of coming into it. So
toxic masculinity.
Just a shame fest.
Yeah. There is a lot of shame, and I think it's why I confront a lot of people that seem like they don't really know who they are yet, even if they're in their 40s, and it's sort of sad, and I want to just be loving to the community, even though they piss me off sometimes or like hurt me, but like you said, it's good boundaries, like the guests at your wedding or the people you invite into your life, if they're going to be judgmental or not accepting, you can stop opening your heart and your energy up to those people. That's good boundaries. You're allowed to.
So when something happens and somebody's coming at me with something, some sort of either feeling, emotion, judgment, sort of whatever, and you feel like they're trying to give it to you, I literally imagine they're coming to me and they're holding a tray and their stuff is on the tray. And they're trying to give me the tray. And all I can do is look down at the tray and just go, not my tray. Like that sort of visualization is what I do to maintain the boundary.
You're not responsible for what's on that tray.
That is your tray. Let me give it back to you. That is your tray. It's not my tray.
Interesting.
Yeah, not my tray.
Yeah.
And that visualization, first the ability to acknowledge and recognize when it's happening. Because the other thing that happens, I'll have students come to me with some sort of crisis or some sort of thing that, oh my God, kind of a thing. And they want to pull me into the crisis. They want to pull me into the whatever is happening. And, first of all, because you want to help and you're there to respond, you start to feel that sort of thing. And then all of a sudden you realize, wait, it's happening. They're coming to me with a tray of drama and stuff. And that's their tray. Nope, you still need to turn the paper in on time, or nope, you still need to, do something at your placement and that sort of stuff. And I'm not going to sort of adopt your crisis mindset.
That probably took a lot of work to get to that point because you probably used to feel responsible for everyone's trays, right?
Yeah. How can I bend over backwards to make this an easier experience for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can relate to that. Which gets annoying. If you sense that energy from someone now, it's like, oh, well. So last year I went to the Hazelden reunion and there was a huge scientific presentation of a recent Harvard study by John Kelly. And one of the findings I found really interesting is that LGBT people, the group that they studied in long-term recovery, measured the lowest kind of sense of fulfillment in their lives in long-term recovery. Why do you think that is, and what should we do about it?
So let's unpack this. Why might that be? What are your thoughts?
The rite of passage for falling into relationships and things like people do in high school, for instance, that wasn't available to us.
So we have disrupted human development. Right? The usual social developmental milestones of having your first date, having your first kiss, having your first relationship, having your first sexual experience. For many people, was done with the wrong gender. Something that was happening and was not a good experience, and then gets delayed. So it doesn't really happen until your 20s or 30s for a lot of people. And so your normal social development has been interrupted. So milestones after that will likely be interrupted. So that's one reason. There's lots of reasons. We have documented the rates of substance use disorders and the rates of substance use are much, much higher in the LGBTQIA plus community. So imagine trying to recover in that community where there just is more use. There just is more.
Definitely.
Yeah, right? And so how do you be a healthy nugget amidst that?
And I think that also the more difficult thing is that within our community, and I'm just speaking for gay men, I'm not sure, but I've heard some things about, is that we have so much pain and shame inside of us that we end up hurting each other viciously way more. So that doesn't help our community get stronger. It tears us apart from the inside.
Right. And what does that do to you as a person trying to recover? It produces all these additional impediments. It makes your ability to make improvements and achievements that much more difficult. So you're going to have lower outcomes than the rest of the population that John Kelly is studying, right? All of it makes sense. All of it makes sense. But yet, the LGBT community is so wide. There are pockets where there are these very healthy dynamics, and it's a matter of plugging into these pockets. So I have two home groups because I still do 12-step recovery. I'm the drum pounding atheist in 12-step recovery. But
those are my favorite meetings.
I every time I can I do. It's possible to be 12-step recovery and be an atheist and have no belief in God. My two home groups. One is a group with healthcare professionals. So doctors, dentists, psychiatrists, all the healthcare professionals, because there's a special kind of thing about being a healthcare provider in recovery. So I have that home group. And my other home group is a closed AA meeting for lesbians. And it's all healthy lesbians. Just with years and years of recovery. And I have those two communities, right? And I'm aware of the more catty, the more judgmental, the more shame-based kind of way of being gay, which I think is because we internalize a lot of the messages that we're told by society of not being good enough or something is wrong with us because we're different, kind of a thing. And so that does get expressed in the ways people treat each other or the judgments people make, right? I'm very familiar with all the judgments in the gay male community. One of my home groups for a long time was a gay male community. And the clickiness and the judgments and the sort of stuff. And you would see somebody coming with a different body type and you could feel how bad they felt about themselves because they didn't fit this sort of judgmental way of being. Or if they came in and weren't into the sexual scene, right? But they wanted to connect and they wanted to be part of the popular clique. Like you saw these dynamics happen all the time. But I think it's all because we have a lot of internalized shame that we're not dealing with.
Yeah, it's sad. I want to find ways to make our community stronger somehow from within because we get enough from the outside world taking our rights away.
We are under assault right
Yeah.
now. The queer community, the trans community is under assault right now.
I agree. And yeah, I want to do what I can to not be one of the people that's tearing the community up from the inside because I have this.
That pull to do it, to be part of it, to fit in.
Yeah.
It can be really hard. It's so uncomfortable, but there's a pull.
It just triggers my rage at not fitting in high school too, and like it just brings it all back.
So if we go back to human development, right? There's certain developmental tasks that are supposed to happen in adolescence. You are primed for social connection. This is why you're super, super interested in who's friends, who's not friends, who's dating who, what's going on, all this other stuff. You are biologically wired to do that because you are now in a developing place where you're supposed to be forming your tribe. You're supposed to be forming those relationships because you need your tribe to survive, right? This is the biological evolutionary drive. Well, if you were a queer kid who never fit in, you haven't gone through that development. So what happens, it gets delayed, and then you're in your 30s and 40s, and you do all these cliquey adolescent kinds of behaviors because you haven't gone through that developmental stage yet.
Yeah, there can be a lot of gay men their cliques feel like Mean Girls, kind of.
Which is what's happening.
But I've also watched people have breakthroughs and break out of that scene a little bit, and then they start to get to know themselves and they carry themselves with a little more humility, and it's like, like I actually really like the real you, not the you that you're when you're pretending to be the richest person and have the best body and have that. Also, toxic masculinity for men, I think it particularly pressures us to pretend to have so much like kind of perfection and finances and travel and kind of to be the alpha male in a way, and there's a lot of pressure on men, and I notice that they're keeping up appearances a lot, you know what I mean?
And there's a lot of isms in the gay community. There's a lot of ageism, there's a lot of bodyism, there's a lot of that sort of stuff. I have sat with a gay guy who was sobbing because he was about to turn 30 and just knew his life was over.
Wow.
Ageism was so instilled.
Yeah. And it can be a joke and a meme, but it's real, right?
People feel
and a lot of people laugh about that, and I think also I'm hopeful about the younger generation because I've found that they're a lot more open to talking about mental health. Sometimes they lead with all their diagnoses. It's like, oh, that's a bit much. You don't have to lead with that, but they're a lot more on board with fighting ageism and other stuff like that. It's interesting.
Yeah, they've also gone through a pandemic, right? They've seen real crisis.
Yeah.
And suddenly age is not a crisis, or judging somebody for who they look like or what their mental health diagnoses are isn't a crisis.
Yeah.
Because I've gone through my own. I've been through the pandemic. I see
right.
kind of a thing. So you see that. I love what the young generation is doing. They are completely tearing apart our construct of gender.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Like it is just awesome.
Yeah, it'd be nice. And I can kind of see a world where now, because acceptance for being different is sort of assumed in that generation. It's an assumption that you have to just accept me and I'm just going to be who I am. And, I like that. I think that's leading us to a world where we can have relationships with the part of our world that's not accepting, that wants everyone to be the same, the part of our world that wants predictable masculine and feminine energy in the right bodies, and
just when I see that, I don't see what they're projecting. I see what's behind it. I see the scared, shame-filled, indoctrinated individual, and I feel great empathy for them because that's a hell of a way to live. That's a horrible way to live.
Interesting way to look at it, because a lot of people would blame the person for being not accepting or a judgmental or a danger.
I still reject the judgment. I still reject the front, right?
But you have this ultimate
and I
compassion.
can still confront the front and the rejection and that sort of stuff. But I see the man behind the curtain. I see the kid behind the curtain that just wants to fit in and never got to fit in, and so is trying to make a special experience where they're the alpha and they're in the clique, right? And that sort of, I just see the little broken kid behind it.
Yeah, it's fear, right? And there's a lot of fear in our world today. It's
Yeah, we are a fear-based world.
But I talk about how sometimes I think we're in a phase of development as a human civilization. And Carl Sagan would probably like this, but we're kind of emotionally evolving, and there's generational trends of emotional development. There's generational trends of, like, say, if your parents weren't really emotionally there for you, it's likely their parents weren't either. But we're starting to break through that generationally, and like our generation, and especially the younger ones, are doing the work at a younger age.
They're going to be the swing generation, where generations that come behind them don't have these things handed down to them because they've done the work, they've unpacked them, they've learned to live differently and to express and live differently, and they're going to pass that on to their children.
So where do you think this is all headed?
We'll see. I mean, we're also in a place of authoritarianism, and things have moved very far to the right, sort of at the upper levels, and that has an impact too.
Yeah, that's right. It's true. The last time I talked to you was before the election. It was a different vibe. And so I was curious about any recent research on addiction that you find interesting lately, or anything you're presenting that you want to talk about?
There's two things that I spend a lot of time with in my head. One is this concept, and this is just part of my training because I was trained as a counseling psychologist. We actually never used the DSM. I didn't have to open the DSM once in 9 years of training for a master's and doctorate degree because we had a different way of viewing what was happening. We were much more interested in looking at the person in relation to the systems they were in. And the DSM is very much about locating the source of the problem within the individual. And where my energy has been drawn lately is to look at the source of the problem as being within the system, and that the person is simply expressing the symptoms through the addiction. So for me, thinking about how the system is producing the symptoms in the individual is just sort of really interesting to me.
The system.
That could be the family system, the work system, social system, political climate, like all of these things are sort of producing.
You see how that all affects your clients.
It's all coming, it's all sort of happening. Whereas, so much of addiction treatment was about taking the individual out of their environment, reconfiguring them, and then putting them back into the environment, right? That's what happens when they come to residential.
Right.
They come to us for 30 days, they do this huge unpacking, they get stabilized, and we try to set them on a new course, but we pretty much put them back in the system. This is why we do long-term things like sober houses and that sort of stuff, because we're changing the system that's sort of happening. But if you look at the problem of you were using because life was miserable, because you were in a relationship you didn't want to be in, or there was trauma happening to your children that was hard to deal with. And again, not all of these things are things you can change or choose to do differently, but seeing that that's what's producing the symptom, right? Or your work is sucking your soul, or you have made some choice in life that you feel locked into, right? Kind of a thing. Looking at that's the source of the problem. It's not within you. It's with your interaction with the system. What's great about that is you do interventions in the system and you sort of work with that. So, what is the block for you helping your child who has trauma or special needs or so whatever is happening, kind of a thing. If there is something happening with the relationship, is it something you want to work on, repair, do differently, leave? That sort of thing. That intervention is in the system. Is there something with your work that you need to explore, identify, again, do differently, leave, choose something, a whole different way of being. The intervention's in the system. And then once the person sets the system around them and they have healthy living in that system and they have full expression of who they are, it produces healing in the person.
But in a system where most social culture revolves around drinking, and most events are advertising you to consume more, and
dopamine nation. This is where we live.
Right.
We live in a capitalist society is built on you need more. You need more, and what drives more in our brains is dopamine. Right. So we all have a dopamine malfunction, and some of us express it through addiction to substances. Others of us express it addiction to work, addiction to money, addiction to, whatever, kind of that drive. The bottom line is I am not enough. I must have something outside of me in order to be enough. And the message is, you are enough. You always have been enough. You are actually more than enough. You are amazing. But you're interacting with a broken system because of the society we live in and because of the way it's produced these things inside of you. So let's find a different way for you to interact where you get to be enough.
That took me a long time to start to accept about our world in recovery, because I felt like I was put in this compartmentalized culture in society. And we have something really special in recovery. We have these meetings. Well, not many other people other than us really have these places that are free. You can go sit in a circle and really share some meaningful stories about your week and what you're going
and a
through.
Good, healthy meeting full of love and acceptance, full of help, full of compassion, right? You get a dose of that.
Yeah, that's sort of maybe an old school tribal culture we had around bonfires back in the day, and we have a void of that in mainstream culture today. But people in recovery know it very well, but our culture is somewhat. What do you feel like it's kind of segregated from mainstream culture? Like, do you feel like you can't quite
recovery
be
culture
in both worlds at the same time?
Are you saying recovery culture?
Yeah.
That's a really hard question for me. I work at Hazelden. I live 12 steps.
Right.
Like I train students. I see. Like this is my world. I have made a world of recovery. My wife's a normie. And so she'll have a night where she goes out and ties one on. So I kind of get to experience that. I actually see it different. We are special people, that our brains are wired a little differently. That when we put certain things in our body, we have a very strong response to them. And that will never change. And so we have to learn not to put those substances in our body. But what makes this beautiful is we have this strong response to other things in our body too. We're very adaptive. We're very creative. We're very capable of forming deep, deep bonds. It's all the same trait. And so I actually love being part of this community because we are those special people. We have this special quirk about us that causes us problems in lots of ways. But when we come to understand it and channel it in the right ways, we have the most amazing lives that people who don't have this little quirk in their brain will never get to experience. So I was in a meeting last night, and I was a nurse. It was the healthcare providers meeting, and she was telling her story. And she shared, she was working with a patient. And there's always this conversation in healthcare provider meetings, how much do we disclose to our patients of our journey and our status, right? Kind of where it is. And this is one of the first times she actually had shared, because she was working with somebody who was in stage alcohol use disorder. And she kind of shared her journey. She's 8 months sober. And he was like, I can't imagine doing X without drinking. And she said, I used to drink a lot when I was gardening and drinking wine. It was just the most beautiful thing in the world. And now I just garden. And it was such a moment for him of like, oh, it's possible to unpair those things and live differently. Like that was his aha moment. Like she had an aha moment with him.
It was such an honor to have you here, someone with so much knowledge and experience in the field. And everyone should check out this book. It's about being a total fraud person, total imposter, addiction professional. It's interesting to find out what happens to an addiction psychologist who is active in their addiction secretly. That's the irony there. And it does have it has a lot of suspense in a way. Makes me really worried about you at some times. And it was so good, I started adapting a screenplay for it. And I just finished the scene with your mom, which is my favorite scene, where you had a total transformation of your relationship with your mother.
Talk about a chapter that poured out of me.
Yeah.
It was a spiritual experience. It was coming from something deep inside. And it just poured onto the page. I did very little editing of that chapter. It just came out.
I love that you shared that and it does feel very raw. And I like the way it's written because it just shows there's so much honesty there. There isn't over editing. You're not telling us a story that's meant to amplify or beautify the emotional experience, dramatize, You're writing real life. And I can tell. I was like, because in real life, people do have these transformative experiences, and people surprise you, even your own mother, and that's fascinating.
Alice woke up in her sleep, a lifeless body, broken down by the weight of her dream. A mark of recklessness caught up in her sleep, a price to pay for such delicacy, and time's hard to measure when you can't stop your eyes. So she swallows the pills and lets herself cry.